The defeat of President Hugo Chávez's constitutional referendum in Venezuela on December 2nd came as a surprise to many analysts and observers. To better understand why the reforms lost, senior news editor Paul Jay spoke to social scientist Edgardo Lander.
In the final analysis, the referendum seemed to come down to President Chávez saying to Venezuelans, just trust me. You can hand me more power, you can eliminate term limits, and trust me to do well with them. And Venezuelans seem to say, well, we may trust you, but we don't trust you that much. And of course, a lot of Venezuelans don't trust him. So what happened?
I think that it's really significant that there's a 3 million difference in votes between the votes Chavez got a year ago to get reelected as president. He got 7,300,000 votes, and the 4,300,000 votes that voted for yes in this occasion. That's a huge difference. And if that's compared with opinion polls in terms of backing for the government, for Chavez, or optimism with its relation to the future of the country, whatever, backing for Chavez seems to remain more or less at the same levels as a year ago. So I think this is very significant because it shows that the country is not a country in which you have some sort of messianic leadership that's followed blindly by a population that just follows the leader. I think it's obvious that this is a message that says this is a moment in which people can actually express their opinion in a way that doesn't threaten the government, doesn't threaten the continuity of the transformations in the country, doesn't threaten Chavez's presidency, but people can say we don't agree. And this, I think, is a sign of political maturity because it's quite obvious from sort of different local results that in many areas that are probably Chavistas, voting levels were quite low, and there were even some Chavista areas where the no won. So this is a message that says this reform process was not sufficiently democratic. This reform process was not the result of a grassroots process of consultation. It was not an expression of people's demands and needs at this very moment. There are other priorities, and these priorities were not taken into account. People feel that there's a distance between their everyday lives in terms of access to food, security, other main issues that have to do with public policies, and this sort of permanent politicization that sort of offers new battles and new struggles and new motives for mobilization, which in some way become detached from everyday life. I think people want the government to be able to work as a government and to solve everyday problems. And if this distance kept on increasing, I think this would have led to a crisis. There are two main reasons why I think the results are very good. In the first place, it shows that the electoral power in Venezuela is trustworthy. The results can be trusted, and this sort of throws overboard the whole argument by the opposition over the last few years that Chavez been in power as a result of fraud. This is certainly not the case. The Venezuelan electoral system is extremely transparent. It's extremely trustworthy, and it's no longer an argument that the opposition can hold against the government. And this is extremely important for the future of democracy in Venezuela. That's one thing. The second thing has to do with what I was saying before. I think that the fact that people are able to vote against proposal or abstain from voting, even if they agree with the government and even if they identify themselves as Chavistas, shows a level of maturity, of political maturity, that is really the base for the construction of democracy. At the very last moment in the campaign, used what can be called a political blackmail when he even claimed that to vote for a yes is to vote for Chavez and to vote for a no is to vote for George Bush. People didn't fall into this trap, and if they didn't agree with the reform, they decided not to vote, basically.
O tú estás con Chávez o tú estás contra Chávez. Así de claro y de sencillo. Los que voten por el sí están votando por Chávez. Y los que voten por el no están votando contra Chávez.
Why did the government and Chavez find this referendum necessary in the first place? Was it really just about the question of term limits, or did they need these other enabling measures in the Constitution? For example, what couldn't they achieve in terms of reforms on the ground that might have been found unconstitutional that required this kind of a change?
Actually, there's a whole lot of things that could have been done with the present Constitution. Things like Social Security, universal Social Security, for instance, is something that's established in the Constitution, in the 1999 Constitution, and if it hasn't been implemented and there's no law on universal Social Security, it's due to the incompetence of Parliament, of the National Assembly. It's got nothing to do with the Constitution itself. The same thing with working hours. According to the present Constitution, working hours should be progressively reduced. That's a constitutional norm. So it wasn't necessary to change the Constitution in order to reduce working hours. There's a few other things like that. I think the two main things that would need a constitutional reform is, in the first place, obviously, and that seems to be sort of the guiding reason for, the principal reason for the constitutional reform proposal, is the permanence of the possibility of re-election. I think that's really sort of a big issue because it's been very difficult this type of leadership makes it extremely difficult for alternative leaderships to emerge. And in some way, Chavez is a cement of different forces and different leaderships and different positions, different conceptions. And if Chavez wasn't around, there's a fear that this might break apart. So this is the main issue for Chavistas and for the process, and it's not a simple issue, obviously. The other main issue has to do with the redistribution of territorial and political organization of the country, the so-called the new geometry of power. And this is the need seen by the government to change the present political and territorial organization in municipalities and states, seen as inefficient, as bureaucratic, and the need to work on new models of territorial and political organization that would allow for greater degrees of coordination between central power and regional powers, etc.